In the last few episodes, we have been talking about the manager role and how it changes when AI enters the workflow. And we all know AI is changing the role, and this is where many organizations need to be careful because of if AI is added to the same unclear workflow, it may not reduce the burden on managers. It may only make the same burden faster, cleaner, and harder to notice. So today, I will make this practical. I'm going to walk you through one simple workflow and show you what changes. I'm going to take the example of a blocked deliverable before a deadline. And this happens in many situations everywhere, in HR projects, in internal operations, in client delivery. Someone is supposed to deliver something and the deadline is close. Work is moving and status says waiting on input. This looks like a simple follow-up problem, yes? And it's usually dealt by send a reminder, ask for the update, and escalate if needed. While the real burden is finding out what is actually blocking the work. That is what manager has to figure out. So in this example, I want to show the same workflow in 3 versions. First, how it looks before AI. Second, how it looks when AI is simply added on top. And third, how it works when the workflow is redesigned for AI native work. Purpose here is simple. By the end, you should be able to see the difference between using AI to make follow-up faster to using AI redesign how blocked work actually gets cleared. Because the value is not just speed. The value is clearer ownership, less manager rescue, better escalation and human judgment used at the right moment. So let's start with the current version. And look at this slide. This is the first slide, the workflow before AI. And you can see at the top, the deliverable is blocked. That is the visible problem, yes? The work was supposed to move, but now it has stopped there. Then the status is appearing that waiting on input. This is where managers' work begins. Because waiting on input sounds clear, but it is not really clear. Is this missing input problem, or is this someone waiting because they do not know what to do next? So here the managers start investigation. They start investigating. They ask the team member what happened. They check last updates, look at the deadline, and go through the messages, check the file, look at meeting notes as well. And then they contact team members, try to understand that who asked the missing input. And very quickly, the manager is no longer just managing the deliverable. What's happening here now? They are managing the handoff, they are the dependency, the gap that is there between the 2 parts of the organization. Then if deadline is getting close, then again, the manager has to escalate that update that's going to the leadership and manage expectations, explain the delay. They calm the team. They protect the relationship and absorb the pressure. And eventually, the work may move. But look at carefully here, what happened here? Why the work moved? Because the manager rescued it, not because workflow design was designed to make the constraint clear. That is the problem. The visible task is follow up on blocked work, but the real task is find the constraint, and then that is why it becomes burden. Sending a reminder is not hard. The hard part is understanding what the reminder is hiding. So before AI, this workflow depends heavily on manager investigation. The workflow doesn't show the real constraint early enough. So the manager has to find it. The workflow doesn't clearly route the ownership. That's why manager has to chase it. And if the workflow doesn't know when escalation is needed, then managers has to judge it. That is why the reason here, the managers become the rescue loop, not because they want to be involved in everything, because workflow keeps returning the unclear parts to them. And now this is where many organizations will say, AI can solve this. And yes, AI can help. It can detect delays, send reminders, summarize the status, draft escalation messages. And this is useful, but there is difference between adding AI to old workflows and redesigning the workflow around the real problem. Let's look at the second version. I'm going to show the second slide here. You can see on screen. Now what this is showing here. What happens when you bring AI added on top of the existing process, how it looks like. AI detects the delay. Of course, that is useful. The manager doesn't have to wait until someone complains. That part solved here. Or until the deadline already at risk. Then AI sends a reminder. That's useful as well. Manager doesn't have to write the same follow-up message again and again. Then AI summarizes the status. Helpful? Yes. It can collect the latest update, clean the worrying, and show what has changed. That AI drafts an escalation that can save time as well, all time saving. So on surface, this looks like progress because time is being saved. But what happened? The delay is visible. The status is cleaner now. The escalation is easier to prepare. But now look at what happens next. The manager still checks the context, still calls people, and rescues the work. So what actually changed here? The manager is no longer chasing in the dark, but the manager is still chasing the work. Work is still coming back to the manager. And this is the trap. I can make the process look improved while the real burden stays in the same place. The hidden work is still with the manager. So this version is not workflow redesign. If we look carefully, this is the old version added AI. Sometimes that is useful, but it doesn't solve the manager burden. And because if AI only detects delays, send reminders, summarizes status, and drafts escalation, it reduces admin. But it doesn't remove that rescue loop that is there. It makes it cleaner, but not removed. So the key part here is why manager may still feel overloaded even after organizations introduce AI tools. Because the visible work become easier, but the hidden work stayed with them. The manager has to figure out still what is blocked, why it is blocked, who owns the next move. Does this need judgment? Does this need escalation? So the better question is not, can AI remind people faster? It is, can the workflow itself identify constraint and route the next action before everything comes back to the manager? That is the shift. And how it will look like in reality, I'm going to show you here. Now look at this third slide here. This is where we stop treating the issue as a reminder problem. We treat it as a constraint clearing problem. That is what AI native workflow redesign should do. This is a redesigned version. And how does this better? If you look at it, the blocker is detected early. That matters because we do not want the manager to discover the problem only when the deadline is already at risk. But the real shift is the next part. AI identifies the blocker, and that is very different from saying the task is delayed. A delay is just a signal. It's not the diagnosis. The useful question here is, what kind of delay is this? Is it missing input? The next action should go to the input owner, not automatically to the manager. Is it a capacity issue? The workflow should show the workload conflict. Maybe the work needs to be redistributed. Maybe the deadline needs to be reviewed. Our priorities need to be clarified. If it is a decision needed, the decision owner should be triggered. Not everyone, not in other meeting by default. The person who owns the decision. And if there is people impact, risk impact, unclear accountability, or the serious trade-off, then manager enters. Because now we are not only dealing with the task movement. We may be dealing with the trust here, performance, maybe conflict, well-being, client risk, accountability. That is where the manager matters. Now look at the manager trigger points here. The manager enters when there is risk, but the manager is not dragged into everything. The manager enters when their judgment actually changes the outcome. And this is very different from the first version. In the first version, we saw, if you remember that workflow, manager investigates everything because the workflow doesn't know what is going on. And in the second version, we saw that AI gives better signals, but the manager still rescues the work. And in the third version, I recently showed you the workflow started clearing the constraint before it becomes a manager rescue problem. Missing input goes to the input owner here. Capacity issues to the team planning. Decisions needed goes to the decision owner. People or risk impact brings in the manager here. And then ownership is recorded. That part matters. Why? Because AI should not only make work faster, it should make ownership clearer. If nobody owns the next move, the workflow is not ready. If the manager is the default answer to every delay, the workflow is not designed. And if AI only sends faster reminders into the same pattern, we have not fixed the burden here. We have automated the noise around it. So this third slide shows the real redesign. We are not moving from manual follow-up to automatic follow-up. That's too small. We are moving from a reminder workflow to to a constraint clearing workflow. Because the workflow should show what is blocked, why it is blocked, who owns the next move, what can move without the manager, and when the manager's judgment is actually required. That is AI native workflow design, not making the manager watch everything, but placing the manager where judgment, accountability, and people impact actually matches. So when we compare these versions, the difference becomes clear here. Before AI blocked work becomes manager investigation. AI bolted on gives clearer signal, but the same rescue loop can remain. And native redesign changes the workflow itself. How it identifies the constraint, it routes the next action, it makes ownership visible, and it brings the manager in only where human judgment matters. That is the real value, not just speed, automation, or better reminders. The value is that workflow becomes clearer. Managers do not need more reminders. Managers need workflows that reveal constraints, because the burden is not always the task. The burden is the hidden investigation behind the task. And if we bring AI into that without redesigning the workflow, we may not reduce manager overload. We may simply give managers better tools to keep rescuing the same broken process. And that is not the future role. Future role is different. The manager is there to help design how blocked work gets cleared, what the system handles, what AI supports, what the team owns, where the decision sits, where accountability is recorded. And where human judgment must stay visible. So before adding AI to our manager's follow-up process, ask a better question. Why was the reminder needed in the first place? Because if AI only makes reminders faster, manager still carries the confusion. And that is exactly what we need to avoid.